let's talk about aviation. Nigeria's aviation sector has witnessed significant challenges in the course of time. A breakdown of the country's aviation statistics, according to the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, shows that the country has 31 airports and 39 air operator certificate holders for flight operations, along with 28 foreign airlines. Nigeria boasts of 2,133 licensed pilots, 1,659 aircraft maintenance engineers, 371 air traffic controllers, and 2,343 cabin crew licensees, among others. Concurrent with this growth, the story of growth, are the challenges to development, much of which, at various times, we seem to have redefined the trajectory of the sector. Captain Rowland Iyayi is a respected stakeholder in aviation circles in Nigeria. He joins me now to cast an expert eye over the country's aviation sector. Well, Captain Iyayi, thank you very much for joining us on This Day Live.
Thank you for having me,
Now,
Dr.
in recent times, there's been a raft of developments in the aviation sector, particularly in recent weeks. We'd like you to help us unpack some of those issues and give us a better understanding of the importance, the implications, and how the country stands to benefit from some of these developments.
Very well. I think in recent times, what we've had to contend with, the developments in the industry, basically, has been more of domestic airlines facing a lot of different issues in terms of the environment in which they operate. Some domestic airlines getting designated to foreign countries, having issues when they arrive at those countries. And we've talked about, or we've seen developments also in the recent times where some people believe, however it is, that Nigeria needs a strong carrier, when in actual fact, the domestic carriers have been made weak. So there are too many issues here that we need to look at in from different angles. The Nigerian domestic carriers particularly are the ones that have held fort in the last 5 decades, more or less. We had deregulation in 1982, and since deregulation to the point where Nigeria Airways was liquidated in 2003, we've had Nigerian domestic carriers walk hand in hand with Nigeria Airways at the time. But since 2003, it's been, in the last 2 decades, it's been domestic carriers that's held the fort for the Nigerian economy. And so, to this point, the domestic carriers are the ones that are key in seeing through the growth of this economy, and this is why it's important to look at, whatever it is that concerns them should concern the government.
Well, let's be specific.
Right.
Some of these recent developments, which Ujinika Okpe brought up in the worst trending segment of the morning show,
right,
we seem to include one. Airpeace fly into Saudi Arabia, okay, and then 177 of the people on board were returned. But the same thing was not done to Saudi Airlines, flying from Nigeria.
Yes.
The embassy said, they intervened and they tried to help and all that. But I don't think that is much of any achievement.
No.
Number 2, again, Airpeace, has landing access to the UK.
Yes.
But they don't know whether they can land at Heathrow, London Heathrow, okay? The other day we read that, UAE now says Airpeace, flag carrier, can get into the UAE to Dubai, but can it land in Dubai? So the whole issue that we have tried to bring up, on the morning show, for example, is about the principle of reciprocity, right? With regard to bilateral air services agreements. Why is it that Nigeria is always holding the wrong end of the stick and the Nigerian government cannot stand up for its flag carriers?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bati. Basically, what we see at play here is aeropolitics. When you have a bilateral agreement, it's between states. And for each state, you specify, there's a generic model to the bilateral agreement. It talks about the capacity you can fly before liberalization. There's a capacity, that's a gauge of the aircraft. There's a frequency, and there's an airport into which you fly. In the Nigeria Airways days, it was very clear. Where you could do 7 frequencies, for instance, the other party will do exactly 7 frequencies. If the other party wants to do anything over and above the 7 frequencies, you now enter into what you call a commercial agreement. But since liberalization, all those things have been set aside. Now, in the regime we're in at, the basis of reciprocity is key to whatever any airline or any international carrier coming into Nigeria must do. British Airways from London, Virgin Atlantic Airways from London were designated by the UK authorities. They didn't designate themselves. And they are flag carriers. So, from the Nigerian end, Air Peace has been designated. There's another airline that's been designated, Omni Blue, to London. We also have United Nigeria that's been designated now to also join the fray. So the point is, when you have a designated airline from your country, the requirement by the host country is that they must provide them access to the primary airport. It doesn't necessarily state which airport, but when you say the primary airport, we know in the UK, for instance, the primary airport is Heathrow Airport. Gatwick Airport is actually a secondary airport. Now, you specifically mentioned Air Peace. Yes, Air Peace indeed, over the maybe in the last 6 months, they've intensified efforts, as it were, to get access into the UK market. They applied to have Heathrow. They were told Heathrow was not available. They were told to go to either Gatwick or Stansted. Gatwick or Stansted are secondary airports. They're not primary airports. Okay, granted, in order to be able to meet the demand of the Nigerian public so that they can, start service, they opted to say, okay, let us even go and get the access into Gatwick, a secondary airport. They went to Gatwick and they were told that there was no access. Gatwick Airport told Air Peace that they could be given only ad hoc, slots, meaning that they could not guarantee the slots from week to week or day to day. Now, it's not the same thing from the Nigerian end. That is not Air Peace's problem. This is a government issue. If the country to which you've designated your carriers are insisting on not allowing them access, you reciprocate. And how do you do that? You insist that that airline coming into the country from that host country is stopped until similar access is provided to the Nigerian carrier. I'll give you an example. In 1997, Nigeria Airways then, had an Airbus 310 that had just come through a C check at the time. They were going to operate this aircraft into London. The UK authorities came back and told Nigeria Airways they would not allow them to fly that particular aircraft into the UK, but now recommended that Nigeria Airways could lease, on a wet lease basis, a UK carrier to operate their London service for them. In which case you're insisting that Nigeria Airways had to pay your carrier to operate its services when you had an aircraft. Now, the minister at the time went to the head of state then, Abacha, and Abacha insisted that the British Airways flight inbound into the country at the time, be denied access to, a landing permit. That particular aircraft was barely 2 hours into Lagos. He diverted to Accra. And that situation persisted for about a whole year because the Nigerian authorities put their foot down to say, well, you're not going to dictate to us, what we do and how we do it as long as we're, in line with the provisions of the bilateral agreement.
So, Captain Iyayi,
yes.
We're talking about reciprocity, we're talking about equity,
yes.
We're talking about access to markets.
Yes.
What is the way forward? Shouldn't the Nigerian government insist that British Airways should now begin to land in Gusau International Airport in Zamfara State, or maybe some Makwe International Airport, and not come to Abuja or Lagos?
Well, that's even taking it too far.
Shouldn't we do that?
It's taking it too far. If today the Nigerian authorities tell British Airways that they cannot land in either Lagos or Abuja at the times they land, because we do not have, or we don't have, the facilities to accommodate them. That would immediately change the perspective, because I can guarantee you this: if British Airways' schedules are moved however it is, an hour, 2, 3, or 4 out of the current schedules, it will disrupt their international operations. And that is what they can ill afford to have. So the point is, why would you make it impossible? And you say there's equity. Why would you make it impossible for a designated carrier from Nigeria with the capacity to be able to fly to your country and be competitive? Why would you want to do that? Essentially, this is what I mean by aeropolitics. The UK authorities are doing everything possible to now create stumbling blocks to ensure that Air Peace, or any Nigerian carrier for that matter, does not have, the opportunity to thrive in those markets. That's what it is. And the sooner the Nigerian government would wake up to understand that this is what they need to do to ensure that there is parity, there's equity, and there's fairness. By the way, the chunk of this market is Nigeria. British Airways is picking up mostly Nigerian passengers. And if he wasn't worth their while, they wouldn't be here. So knowing that we have the market muscle, why can the government not insist? And again, we keep talking about making sure Nigerians get the best of the deal. They're not going to get the best of the deal if they're going to be paying 10 million naira, for instance, to fly to London. Because airline tickets right now on British Airways, the cheapest is about maybe $4,000 or $5,000. So, if you have a Nigerian carrier that's willing to come online and be able to afford the same, avail Nigerians the same service for way fraction of what it is that's being charged, why would you stop that? So invariably, the monopoly that's been enjoyed, by British Airways and Virgin Atlantic Airways on that route till date is what the British authorities are trying to preserve. And the sooner the Nigerian government will wake up to this and understand it and stop them, the better for everybody.
Okay, well, what is the role of Nigerian diplomatic missions abroad? In the incident that occurred in Saudi Arabia, the embassy said, they intervened and all of that. And what should be the role? We have a new minister of aviation and aerospace development. Now, he says Emirates is going to start flying back into Nigeria, and that next year he will have an air show, and he's saying that the parastatals should sit up or he will sack them and all that. What do you think of all those, media appearances by the new minister? I use the word appearances advisedly. Well,
again, the Honorable Minister of Aviation and Development, Aerospace Development, actually has quite a bit on his plate. And my belief is he needs to, at this point, take charge fully, of the industry. There are quite a lot of things that can be done for the industry as we speak. And as the airlines in the market, the domestic airlines, we've approached the minister and we've presented the status of the industry to the minister. And not just that, we have also proffered probable solutions to some of these problems so that at least we can have a more hospitable environment in which to operate. If he takes on the charge to address the issues at home, then of course it makes it a lot easier for things to thrive, because really and truly, this economy is what the domestic airlines sustain, not any foreign economy. So we must start from home. They say charity begins at home, so we need to start from home. The minister needs to address those concerns the airlines have tabled. I believe there's need for international diplomacy, which is some of the things he's engaged, at this point in time, meeting people in different fora to be able to, sell Nigeria to them. Yeah, that's important as well. But key is the fact that the domestic issues that we have, identified and we have provided solutions need to be looked at critically and urgently, because this industry is actually it sustains the entire economy of this country. If an airline like Air Peace, Azman has stopped flying. Why? Forex issues. Azman has 3 airplanes in different parts of the country, of the world, undergoing sea checks. But as we speak, does not have the foreign exchange to recover them. The same Azman has flown for the Hajj, yet to be paid. Air Peace, the same thing. Max Air, the same thing. So some domestic airlines are constrained. So generally, the issue of forex, the issue of fluctuating prices of jet fuel, these are issues that are affecting the domestic market. And these are the things I believe the government should be looking at critically at this point for the sustenance of the industry.
Okay, talking about domestic airlines, there's a man called Negatu, who has shown up in a video in recent weeks complaining about domestic airlines in Nigeria,
right,
opposing the idea of Nigeria Air.
Yes.
Who is this Negatu man from Fairfax, I think?
Yes.
Yes. What's his stake in the matter?
Well, just like everybody else, we saw a video of the gentleman, berating Nigerian domestic carriers for going to court. Unfortunately, it's his right to say whatever he has to say. But what we know is that when the bid for Nigeria Air was put in place, there was never a company called Fairfax. We were told that the consortium was Ethiopian Airlines, SACO, and MRS. Those are the three groups, three different companies that came up as a consortium and the winners of a bid for Nigeria Air. So all of a sudden on the 20th of May this year, barely a week to the end of the last regime, Fairfax came into the picture with a letter claiming he had been in the background working on Nigeria Air for about 3 years, he said. And in that same letter, he was writing to the consortium. So if he was part of it, he wouldn't need to be telling them. So he was writing to the consortium saying that, for all he has done, particularly in the last 3 years, putting together the consortium and making sure the whole business can thrive, he would earn 1.45% of the total amount that will be used to set up Nigeria Air, i.e., equity and debt. And he claims that there's $500 million already established for that purpose. So essentially, his earnings will be 1.45% of $500 million. He also said in the same document that he would have a seat on the board of Nigeria Air for 5 years, renewable for another 5 years. He also said that the issue of security of flights for Nigeria Air, both domestic and international, the issue of catering on all the flights will be for him to refuse or take, meaning that the right to refuse will be given to him first before anybody else is considered. So when you look at it from that standpoint, Mr. Negatu is an Ethiopian. And for all intents and purposes, he is only feathering the nest of the Ethiopian in this transaction. He does not in any way represent what the domestic airlines think. So for him to berate the domestic airlines is essentially because he feels whatever it is he's looking at in the longer term, is being scuttled. We're not going to allow a contraption which we know is designed to fleece taxpayers to thrive.
Okay, but Captain Iyayi, look, there's Airline Operators of Nigeria.
That's correct.
It looks like you guys don't even want any form of competition on the domestic front. After all, Askai Air, right,
yes,
of Togo,
yes,
also wanted to get into the Nigerian market in the spirit of integration in Africa, African free trade, continental agreement,
yes,
and all of that.
Yes.
So why are Airline Operators of Nigeria? They don't want to see Ethiopians. They don't want to see Togolese.
Yes.
They just want this space for themselves alone.
Well, let me say this.
Isn't that protectionism
No,
in the age of globalization?
No.
The more the merrier, some people will say.
That is not entirely correct. The same ICAO convention, premised on which international aviation runs, talks about cabotage. A convention article specifically talks about cabotage. Now, when you allow a foreign airline into your domestic market, that is cabotage. There's a difference in allowing foreign airlines to come into your country and go out of your country. But when they come into the country flying from one part to the other, it becomes cabotage. Because no airline, and that's a provision of the ICAO convention, No airline, no international airline is allowed to come into your domestic market to do what you call cabotage. And that's essentially what it is. Now, on the issue of SATIN, which is what you're talking about, the single African air transport market,
yes.
Essentially, if and when that takes off, then it becomes very easy. I'll give you an example. Nigerian operators have left Nigeria trying to go to the region, West African region, and they have been given discriminatory handling charges to discourage them from coming in, where they were not able to say you can't come. It took a domestic carrier about 2 years to be able to get into Togo. Askai is a majority share, is majorly owned by Ethiopian Airlines, but set up in Togo. Now, Askai wanted to come into the domestic market using a domestic carrier as a back to be able to leverage that and come into the market. It is still cabotage. Essentially, if all these other entities clamoring for Nigeria had the market, they wouldn't need Nigeria. But the problem is they are protectionist. They've tended to protect their own markets, but would rather go into other markets. You cannot go into Ethiopia today, right? There's only one charter company besides Ethiopian Airline. And that charter company is not allowed to compete with Ethiopian Airlines. So we're talking about protectionism. What exactly is that? They protect their markets, yet they want to foray into other markets. That is the point we're trying to make. We're not saying people shouldn't come in. Ideally, if things worked, yes, it will make the market a lot easier for everybody. We talk about connectivity. Those are the things that will benefit. But ideally, there's no ideal situation here. We're having a situation where everything is skewed against the domestic carriers, in favor of the international operators, when the reverse should be the case. So you have Qatar Airways, for instance, fly into Abuja, from Abuja to pick up passengers and go into Port Harcourt, and then come back the same way and go out of Abuja, come into Abuja the next day and go into Kano. That is depleting the domestic market. So what competition are you creating for domestic carriers? So these are the things we're clamoring against and saying, listen, if you want domestic carriers to thrive, then you can't do this in any other climes. You can't go to London or to the UK and fly into London and say you're not living in London and fly into Manchester to pick up passengers and come back to London, pick up passengers. Nobody would allow you that. It's cabotage. Okay. So these are the things we are clamoring against, and we're saying it is not right. We should give the domestic carriers the opportunity to thrive in their own markets.
I get your point, and the Nigerian government must look out for its own interests and the interests of the people who do business in the aviation sector, domestic carriers, flag carriers, from the Nigerian end, instead of sucking up to foreign airlines.
That's correct.
To the disadvantage of the domestic carriers. I'd like to thank you very much, Captain Rowland Iyayi, for joining us on This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show.